Two identical faces stared in disbelief as the flight attendant who treated them like baggage handlers minutes earlier now stood frozen, her complexion draining to ghostly white. Behind her, their father, impeccably dressed in his company blazer, pointed to the logo on his chest, Washington Airways. My airline. Before we dive into this incredible story of justice served at 30,000 feet, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button if you've ever witnessed someone getting exactly what they deserved, and subscribe to catch more true stories of karma and triumph every week. Malcolm and Jasper Washington were identical twins in every physical aspect, same broad shoulders, same confident stride, same warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when they smiled. But those who knew them understood the subtle differences in their personalities. At 28 years old, both had achieved what many considered impossible, becoming commercial airline pilots despite the persistent barriers facing black men in aviation. Their journey began on their 10th birthday when their father, Isaiah Washington, took them to an airshow in Atlanta. The brothers watched in awe as jets roared overhead, performing impossible maneuvers against the clear blue sky. One pilot in particular, an older black man who'd flown with the Tuskegee Airmen, spoke with the boys afterward. "The sky belongs to everyone," he told them, his weathered hands resting on their small shoulders. "Don't let anyone tell you different." That day transformed childhood fascination into lifelong ambition. Throughout middle school and high school, the twins excelled in science and mathematics, joining aviation clubs and spending weekends at small airfields washing planes in exchange for brief lessons. Their father, a successful business owner with a background in finance, supported their dreams wholeheartedly, though he never revealed the full extent of his own aviation connections. After graduating with honors, both brothers earned appointments to the Air Force Academy, where they distinguished themselves as exceptional pilots and officers. Malcolm specialized in transport aircraft while Jasper excelled in fighter jets. Their military service included combat deployments, humanitarian missions, and instructor positions, building impressive resumes that should have made civilian airlines eager to hire them after their service commitment ended. Reality proved harsher. Despite their credentials, advanced certifications, thousands of flight hours, and immaculate records, many airlines found subtle excuses to pass them over. "We're looking for someone who's a better culture fit," one interviewer explained vaguely. Another mentioned concerns about cockpit chemistry with the predominantly white pilot corps. The rejection stung, but never deterred them. Malcolm approached these obstacles with quiet determination, following every regulation and procedure to perfection, believing excellence would eventually overcome prejudice. Jasper, more outspoken by nature, often challenged discriminatory practices directly, calling out double standards when he saw them. "You have to fly above the storms of ignorance," their father often reminded them. "Navigate around the turbulence. Find your clear air." Isaiah's wisdom had guided them through disappointment after disappointment, until finally, Washington Airways, a growing mid-size carrier with routes spanning North America, hired both brothers within months of each other. Today marked a milestone, their first official flight together as co-pilots on the prestigious Atlanta to San Francisco route. They arrived at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport 3 hours before departure, their matching uniforms crisp, gold wings gleaming against the dark fabric. "Ready for this?" Malcolm asked, adjusting his epaulets as they strode through the employee entrance. Jasper grinned. "Been ready since we were 10. As they made their way through the terminal toward the Flight Operations Center, they couldn't help noticing the double takes from passengers and even some crew members. Two black pilots was still an uncommon sight, identical twins in the cockpit, unprecedented. In the operations room, they meticulously reviewed weather reports, maintenance logs, and flight plans. Their thoroughness impressed Captain Harold Weber, a 30-year veteran who would supervise this inaugural flight as their check airman. "Washington and Washington," he said, shaking their hands firmly. "Sounds like a law firm." His easy manner put them at ease, though they could hear the whispers from ground crew members nearby. "Affirmative action special," one muttered just loud enough to be heard. "Two of them," another replied. Must be lowering standards these days. The twins exchanged glances but said nothing. They'd heard worse. Today was too important to let ignorance cast a shadow on their achievement. Little did they know that the real challenge wouldn't come from their fellow pilots or the ground crew, but from a senior flight attendant determined to put them in their place before they ever left the ground. Rachel Bennett had worked for Washington Airways and its predecessor companies for 15 years. At 47, she prided herself on maintaining the golden age standards of aviation service, impeccable appearance, rigid adherence to protocol, and what she considered proper respect for hierarchy. Her blonde hair was always perfectly styled beneath her uniform cap, her makeup precisely applied according to company guidelines, her navy uniform unwrinkled despite the long hours of flight service. The morning began like any other for Rachel. She arrived at her crew briefing, coffee in hand, reviewing the passenger manifest for the Atlanta to San Francisco flight. When the pilot information came across her tablet, she frowned. There must be some mistake, she said to Heather, a junior attendant beside her. It says Washington and Washington in the flight deck. Twins, I heard, Heather replied. First time the airlines had brothers piloting together. Rachel's lips thinned. Brothers? Interesting hiring choice. Her first encounter with Malcolm and Jasper occurred at the employee security checkpoint. The twins had just placed their credentials on the scanner when Rachel approached, her eyes narrowing at the sight of two black men in pilot uniforms. Excuse me, she said, her voice carrying the artificial sweetness that barely masked condescension. This entrance is for flight crew only. Ground staff uses the entrance around the corner. Malcolm turned, credentials already displaying his captain status on the screen. We are flight crew, ma'am. First Officer and Second Officer Washington. Rachel's eyes flicked between their faces and the security monitor, her expression shifting from authority to suspicion. Both of you? You're both pilots on the same flight. That's correct, Jasper replied evenly. Atlanta to San Francisco, Washington Airways Flight 1382. I'll need to see additional identification, Rachel declared, stepping closer. It's unusual, and we have strict security protocols. The security officer behind the desk looked uncomfortable. Ms. Bennett, their credentials have already cleared. They're authorized for flight deck access. Rachel ignored him, hand outstretched expectantly toward the brothers. Company ID and pilot licenses, please. Just being thorough. The twins complied without complaint, though the request was clearly outside standard procedure. No other pilots were being asked for this additional verification. The small audience of ground crew and other flight attendants watched in awkward silence. After scrutinizing their documentation far longer than necessary, Rachel reluctantly stepped aside. Very well. Though I must say, it's quite unusual. I suppose the company has its reasons for these progressive hiring decisions. As the brothers walked away, her voice carried just loud enough for them to hear. Affirmative action does wonders these days, doesn't it? The incident might have ended there, but Rachel seemed determined to establish her authority over the Washington brothers. During pre-flight preparations, she intercepted them repeatedly with unusual requests. Our overhead bin in first class seems stuck, she told Malcolm, interrupting his systems check. Since maintenance is backed up, perhaps you could take a look. You seem handy. Later, she approached Jasper. Some bags need rearranging in the cargo hold. The handlers are short-handed, would you mind helping? You look strong enough for the job. These tasks, fixing cabin fixtures, handling baggage, were never requested of white pilots. The implied message was clear, in Rachel's eyes, they were service workers first, pilots second. The brothers complied silently each time, exchanging knowing glances but maintaining professional composure. They'd faced this behavior throughout their careers and had developed strategies for handling it without escalation. This flight was too important to jeopardize over one prejudiced flight attendant. Other crew members noticed, however. Alicia Turner, a younger flight attendant with 3 years at the airline, watched with increasing discomfort as Rachel continued her campaign of microaggressions. "She's been with the company forever, but that doesn't excuse it," Alicia whispered to Heather as they stalked the galley. "Someone should report her." "And say what?" Heather replied. "She's careful. Never says anything explicitly racist, just implies it. Besides, senior attendants like her have friends in management." The pattern continued throughout pre-flight procedures. Rachel accidentally referred to Malcolm as ground staff when introducing him to another crew member. She questioned Jasper's familiarity with the aircraft type despite his extensive experience logged in their flight records. Each interaction carried the unmistakable subtext, "You don't belong here." Malcolm maintained his calm, professional demeanor despite the growing tension. Jasper's jaw tightened with controlled anger, but he too remained composed. They had worked too hard, overcome too many obstacles, to let one bigoted flight attendant derail their historic first flight together. What Rachel couldn't have known was that her behavior was setting in motion events that would permanently change her career trajectory, and the culture of Washington Airways itself. The gleaming cockpit of the Boeing 737-800 represented everything Malcolm and Jasper Washington had dreamed of since childhood. Modern avionics displays cast a soft blue glow across the control panels as they settled into their seats, beginning the methodical process of pre-flight checks with the precision drilled into them through years of training. "Electrical systems?" Malcolm called out, fingers dancing across switches. "Checked and operational," Jasper responded, his voice carrying the same focused tone. For a moment, both brothers paused, sharing a look that acknowledged the significance of this moment. Their journey to these seats had been anything but straightforward. "Remember that flight instructor at Embry-Riddle?" Malcolm asked, adjusting his headset. "The one who told us we'd never make it past regional carriers?" Jasper chuckled. "Which one?" There were at least 3. Their laughter temporarily lightened the atmosphere that had been strained by Rachel's behavior. The memories of rejection letters from major airlines, the countless interviews where they were passed over for less qualified white candidates, the whispered comments in flight school about quota fillers, all of it had steeled their resolve rather than weakening it. "Continental turned us down on the same day," Malcolm recalled, testing the rudder pedals. "United the week after. Delta didn't even call back," Jasper added. "And American scheduled interviews then lost our applications twice." The conversation halted abruptly as the cockpit door swung open. Rachel Bennett entered without knocking, flight manifest clutched in her manicured hands, her expression professionally neutral yet somehow conveying disapproval. "Captains," she said, deliberately using the plural incorrectly despite knowing only Malcolm held captain rank. "I've brought the final passenger count and weight distribution." "Thank you, Ms. Bennett," Malcolm responded professionally. "You can place it here." Rachel didn't move to set down the paperwork. Instead, she glanced around the cockpit with exaggerated concern. "This is a rather important route. San Francisco is our CEO's home base, isn't it? I trust you're both fully certified on this aircraft type." The implication was clear: were they qualified, or merely diversity hires? First Officer Washington has over 5,000 hours on Boeing 737s, Malcolm replied evenly. "I have nearly 6,000. Our qualifications are listed in the flight crew information if you'd like to review them." Rachel's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Just being thorough. Passenger safety is my primary concern, naturally. Some passengers have expressed concerns." "What concerns specifically?" Jasper asked, his tone carefully controlled. Before she could respond with whatever fabrication she'd prepared, Captain Harold Weber appeared in the doorway behind her, his imposing 6'4" frame filling the space. "Everything all right in here?" he asked, his experienced eyes taking in the tension immediately. "Just delivering the manifest, Captain," Rachel replied, her demeanor instantly shifting to deferential respect. "And ensuring our pilots have everything they need for a safe flight." Weber's gray eyebrows lifted slightly. "The Washingtons are 2 of our most qualified pilots, Ms. Bennett. I've reviewed their records personally. This aircraft couldn't be in better hands. Rachel nodded stiffly, placing the manifest down and exiting without further comment. Captain Weber watched her leave, then turned to the brothers. "Don't let it get to you," he said quietly. "Some people are stuck in the last century. Your performance will speak louder than their prejudice." After Weber left to complete his own preparations, the twins continued their checks in focused silence. The incident had cast a shadow over what should have been a purely celebratory day. A text message alert chimed on both their phones simultaneously. Their father. "Proud of you both today. Fly safe. Call when you land." They smiled at Isaiah's typical brevity. Their father had always been their greatest supporter, though he rarely expressed it effusively. A self-made businessman who had overcome his own barriers to success, Isaiah Washington had taught his sons resilience in the face of prejudice. Neither brother mentioned Rachel's behavior in their brief reply. No need to worry their father with problems they'd handled countless times before. Outside the cockpit, the cabin buzzed with pre-departure activity. Alicia Turner moved efficiently through her tasks, keeping a watchful eye on Rachel. During the crew briefing, Alicia had attempted to redirect Rachel's obvious prejudice. "The Washington brothers have amazing service records," she'd mentioned casually. "I heard they both flew combat missions overseas." Rachel had dismissed this with a wave. "Military flying is different. Commercial aviation requires a certain polish. Certain people simply don't fit the profile our passengers expect in the flight deck." Now, as Rachel continued her subtle campaign against the twins, questioning their decisions on whether routing to other crew members, making comments about inexperience within earshot, Alicia began documenting the behavior discreetly in her crew notes app. Passengers streamed aboard, filling the cabin with the usual pre-flight energy. Most were oblivious to the undercurrents of tension among the crew, though several noticed the twin pilots during boarding and reacted with varying degrees of surprise or approval. Two of them, one elderly white passenger muttered to his wife. "That's different." "How wonderful," another passenger, a black businesswoman, commented warmly. "My son wants to be a pilot. He'll be thrilled when I tell him." Rachel overheard both comments, her face tightening at the latter. She directed a junior attendant to take over greeting first-class passengers while she busied herself in the galley, her movements sharp with barely contained irritation. In the cockpit, final preparations were underway. The flight plan showed clear conditions for most of the route, with some turbulence expected over the Rockies. Captain Weber would supervise this first joint flight, but the Washington brothers would handle the actual flying, Malcolm for takeoff and the first half, Jasper for the approach and landing in San Francisco. Weather radar checked and operational, Jasper confirmed. Navigation systems aligned and programmed, Malcolm added. Their synchronized efficiency impressed Weber, who had seen countless pilot teams over his 3 decades of flying. "You two work together like you've been doing this for years," he observed. Jasper smiled. "We've been practicing in simulators since we got hired. Wanted our first official flight together to be perfect." Little did they know that perfection would be tested by more than technical challenges. As the final boarding call went out, a last-minute passenger made his way onto the aircraft, one whose presence would dramatically alter the course of events about to unfold above the clouds. The boarding process was nearly complete, flight attendants conducting final cabin checks before departure. Rachel Bennett stood near the forward galley, mentally counting down the minutes until the cabin door would close, when a latecomer approached the jet bridge. "Sorry, we have one more," the gate agent called through the door. Standby passenger cleared at the last minute. Rachel's practiced smile tightened. Late additions meant potential delays, disrupted seating arrangements, and additional work. She stepped forward to greet the final passenger, clipboard in hand. A distinguished black man in his early 60s entered the aircraft. He wore a tasteful charcoal suit, no tie, with an understated gold watch peeking from beneath his sleeve. His close-cropped hair showed distinguished gray at the temples, and he carried only a premium leather briefcase and a copy of the Wall Street Journal. "Good morning," he said with a warm, resonant voice. "Isaiah Johnson. Stand by for first class." Rachel glanced at her manifest update. "Mr. Johnson. You were fortunate to get a seat. We're completely full today." Isaiah smiled politely. "Yes, very fortunate." Something about his calm confidence irked Rachel. She extended her hand with unnecessary firmness. "I'll need to see your boarding pass and ID again, please. Standby passengers require additional verification." This was not standard protocol, particularly for passengers who had already been cleared at the gate, but Isaiah complied without complaint, presenting his credentials and boarding pass. Rachel scrutinized them far longer than necessary, holding the line behind him. "Is there a problem?" Isaiah asked mildly. "Just being thorough," Rachel replied, her tone suggesting she suspected some irregularity. "First class is to your right. 2C window seat." As Isaiah moved past her, Rachel added, "The overhead bins may be full already. You might need to check that bag." Isaiah glanced at his slim briefcase, which would easily fit under the seat in front of him, but simply nodded and continued down the aisle. From her position assisting with boarding in the mid-cabin, Alicia Turner observed the interaction with growing concern. She had noticed Rachel's pattern of subjecting black passengers, particularly well-dressed ones, to extra scrutiny, as though she found their presence in premium cabins somehow suspicious. What caught Alicia's attention more, however, was the newcomer's striking resemblance to the Washington brothers. Same strong jawline, similar eyes, even the way he carried himself projected the same quiet dignity. She watched as he settled into his first-class seat, curious about the connection. Rachel, meanwhile, seemed determined to establish her authority over this final passenger. As Isaiah stowed his briefcase and settled in, she approached again. "Sir, that briefcase will need to go completely under the seat for takeoff," she instructed, despite the fact that it was already properly stowed. "Of course," Isaiah replied, making an unnecessary adjustment to appease her. "And your seat needs to be upright." "It is upright," he noted calmly. Rachel's lips thinned. "We'll be coming through for a final compliance check shortly." As she turned away, Isaiah pulled out his phone and made a brief note, an action that didn't escape Rachel's notice. She returned moments later. "All electronic devices must be switched to airplane mode now," she stated firmly, though the door was still open and such restrictions weren't yet in effect. Of course, Isaiah complied, visibly enabling airplane mode. "Thank you for the reminder." Throughout these interactions, Isaiah maintained perfect courtesy, but his eyes, remarkably similar to the Washington twins, missed nothing. He observed Rachel's interactions with other first-class passengers, noting the stark difference in her tone and helpfulness. When the white businessman across the aisle asked for a pre-departure water, Rachel promptly provided it with a warm smile. When Isaiah made the same request minutes later, she responded, "We're preparing for departure now. I'll have to get that for you once we're airborne." In the cockpit, Malcolm and Jasper Washington were completely unaware of their father's presence aboard the aircraft. They continued methodical preparations for departure, reviewing checklists and confirming clearances with air traffic control. "Washington Airways 1382, you're cleared to push back. Contact ground on 121.9 when ready to taxi. Cleared to push, contacting ground on 121.9. Washington Airways 1382, Malcolm confirmed. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Rachel performed her safety demonstration with mechanical precision. She barely glanced at Isaiah when checking his seatbelt, while offering friendly reminders to other passengers. The subtle pattern of differential treatment continued as the plane taxied toward the runway. When minor turbulence during takeoff caused a passenger's drink to spill, Rachel quickly assisted the white female passenger with extra napkins and a replacement beverage once the seatbelt sign turned off. When Isaiah's newspaper slipped to the floor during the same turbulence, she stepped over it without offering assistance. Isaiah observed all of this with the careful attention of someone accustomed to noticing details. He made occasional notes on his phone, his expression revealing nothing. The aircraft climbed smoothly through scattered clouds, a testament to Malcolm's skilled handling of the controls. Once they reached cruising altitude, Captain Weber made a brief announcement, introducing First Officer Washington and Second Officer Washington without mentioning they were twins, then explaining the expected flight time and weather conditions. Have you ever witnessed discrimination happening right before your eyes? Comment number 1 if you believe Rachel's behavior crosses the line from poor service to actual discrimination. Comment number 2 if you think Isaiah should immediately report her actions. Comment number 3 if you're wondering what connection exists between Isaiah Johnson and the Washington brothers. This story is about to take an unexpected turn that nobody, especially Rachel, sees coming. Like and subscribe so you don't miss what happens when the truth finally emerges about these three men. As beverage service began, Rachel deliberately started at the opposite end of first class from where Isaiah sat, ensuring he would be served last. When she finally reached him, her service was noticeably perfunctory. "Water," Isaiah requested politely. "Still or sparkling?" Rachel asked, her tone making it clear she found the question tedious. "Still, please. With ice if possible." She poured the water without adding ice, despite having provided ice to every other passenger who requested it. "We're running low on ice," she explained without apology, though the galley had been freshly stocked before departure. Isaiah accepted the drink with a polite "thank you," then pressed the call button moments after she moved away. Rachel's expression tightened when she saw the illuminated button. She deliberately finished serving 2 more rows in economy before returning to Isaiah's seat. "Yes?" she asked, her artificial smile barely concealing her annoyance. "I'm sorry to trouble you," Isaiah said, "but I forgot to ask for ice." "As I mentioned, we're running low on ice," Rachel repeated. "I understand. But I noticed the gentleman across the aisle received ice just moments ago." Caught in the obvious discrepancy, Rachel's smile became even more forced. "Let me check if we have any left." She returned with a single cube of ice, dropping it into his water with barely disguised contempt. "Will there be anything else?" she asked, clearly hoping the answer would be no. "Actually, yes," Isaiah replied calmly. "I'd like to speak with you about a safety concern." This caught Rachel's attention. Safety concerns were taken seriously in aviation, and procedurally, she was obligated to listen. "What sort of safety concern?" she asked, her demeanor shifting to professional alertness. "It relates to the flight deck," Isaiah said quietly. "Perhaps we could speak more privately." Rachel nodded and gestured toward the front galley, away from other passengers' ears. Once there, Isaiah spoke in measured tones. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with another flight attendant earlier about our pilots." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "I'm not sure what you mean." "You expressed concerns about their qualifications," Isaiah continued. "As a frequent flyer with this airline, that naturally caught my attention. I'm curious what specifically concerned you about these pilots." Rachel hesitated, studying Isaiah. Seeing what she interpreted as a sympathetic ear, another black professional who might understand her concerns without immediately labeling them as racist, she made a critical miscalculation. "Between us," she said, lowering her voice, "I question the wisdom of having 2 inexperienced pilots flying together. Especially when they were clearly diversity hires." Isaiah raised an eyebrow. "Diversity hires? What makes you say that?" Rachel leaned in slightly. "Washington Airways has been pushing this inclusion initiative lately. Hiring people who wouldn't normally make the cut, to meet quotas. These 2 barely have any commercial experience, they're military pilots. It's completely different." "You've reviewed their qualifications?" Isaiah asked mildly. "I've seen enough pilots come through to know," Rachel replied with unwarranted confidence. "The airline is more concerned with how things look than real merit these days." "That sounds concerning indeed," Isaiah said neutrally. "And these pilots, the Washington brothers, you believe they're underqualified specifically because?" Rachel caught herself before saying something explicitly racist, but her implication remained clear. Let's just say some people are pushed through training to check boxes. It creates unnecessary risk. I see, Isaiah nodded thoughtfully. Would you mind telling me your full name and employee number? I'd like to include it in my feedback. Believing she'd found an ally who shared her concerns about the airline's diversity initiatives, Rachel proudly supplied her information. Rachel Bennett, employee number 87542. I've been with this airline for 15 years. I've seen all the changes, not all for the better. Thank you, Ms. Bennett. That's very helpful. Their conversation was interrupted as Captain Weber emerged from the cockpit for a brief stretch, standard procedure during long flights. He noticed Isaiah and paused, recognition flickering across his face. Mr. Johnson, he said with evident respect. I didn't realize you were aboard today. Last-minute decision, Isaiah replied casually. Just observing operations. Rachel glanced between them, confusion evident on her face. Weber clearly knew this passenger, and the tone of their brief exchange suggested Isaiah Johnson was someone important, perhaps from corporate headquarters. As Weber returned to the cockpit, Rachel's demeanor toward Isaiah subtly shifted. Her previously dismissive attitude transformed into nervous attentiveness, though she still had no idea of his true connection to the pilots she'd been disparaging. Little did she know, the man she'd been treating with thinly veiled contempt for the past hour wasn't just a random passenger or even a corporate executive. He was about to become the central figure in a moment of reckoning that would permanently alter the course of her career. The Boeing 737-800 cruised smoothly at 36,000 feet, cutting through occasional wisps of cirrus clouds as it traversed the heartland of America. In the cockpit, Malcolm and Jasper Washington maintained the professional focus that had defined their careers, monitoring systems and communicating with air traffic control stations as they passed from one regional center to the next. Washington 1382, contact Indianapolis Center on frequency 134.2, came the instruction from the previous controller. Switching to Indianapolis Center, 134.2. Washington 1382, Malcolm replied, adjusting the radio frequency with practiced ease. Captain Weber observed their performance with quiet approval. After 30 years in commercial aviation, he could recognize exceptional pilots within minutes of seeing them work. The Washington brothers operated with a synchronized efficiency that went beyond their identical appearances, an almost intuitive coordination born from shared training and mutual trust. I'm stepping out for a moment, Weber announced, unbuckling his harness. You two have things well in hand. As the captain left the flight deck for his scheduled break, the twins exchanged a quick glance of satisfaction. This supervised flight was essentially their final examination, proving they could operate safely and efficiently as a team despite being siblings, a combination some in the airline had questioned on psychological grounds. The memory of their father's words echoed in both their minds, excellence leaves no room for their excuses. Isaiah Washington had built his own business from nothing, facing discrimination at every turn. His mantra had always been to perform so exceptionally well that even bigots would be forced to acknowledge their competence. Meanwhile, in the first-class cabin, Isaiah Johnson sat contemplating his conversation with Rachel Bennett. Throughout his life, he had encountered countless people like her. Individuals who viewed black excellence with automatic suspicion, who assumed that any person of color in a position of authority or privilege must have benefited from lowered standards rather than exceptional merit. As a young man in the 1980s, Isaiah had dreamed of becoming a pilot himself. He'd saved for flying lessons while working 3 jobs, only to have flight schools mysteriously cancel his enrollment once he arrived in person. Commercial airlines had rejected his applications despite perfect test scores. Eventually, he'd channeled his passion for aviation into building a successful aviation supply company, providing components to major aircraft manufacturers. The irony that his sons had achieved what systematic racism had denied him wasn't lost on Isaiah. He'd kept his ownership of Washington Airways deliberately quiet when they applied, insisting they use their mother's maiden name professionally to ensure they earned their position strictly on merit. Only a handful of board members knew of the connection. Isaiah pressed the call button again. Rachel appeared promptly this time, her previous disdain replaced by cautious professionalism after witnessing Captain Weber's respectful interaction with him. "Yes, Mr. Johnson. How can I help you?" "I'd like to visit the flight deck briefly," Isaiah stated. "I understand this is permitted under certain circumstances." Rachel's smile faltered. While cockpit visits weren't completely prohibited on Washington Airways flights during cruise, they were unusual and generally reserved for VIPs or aviation professionals with specific authorization. "That's not standard procedure, sir. I'd need to check with the captain." "Please do," Isaiah replied calmly. Rachel hesitated. "May I ask the purpose of your visit?" "Professional interest. I have some questions about the aircraft systems." Reluctantly, Rachel knocked on the cockpit door. When Jasper opened it slightly, she explained the situation in hushed tones. "There's a first-class passenger requesting flight deck access. A Mr. Johnson." Captain Weber seemed to know him. Jasper's expression remained neutral. "Let me check with my brother." After a brief consultation, Jasper reopened the door. "We can accommodate a short visit during this stable cruise portion." Captain Weber authorized visits at his discretion before his break. Rachel had no choice but to comply, though her body language suggested deep discomfort as she escorted Isaiah to the flight deck. "Please limit your visit to 5 minutes, she instructed, her tone carrying an authority she didn't actually possess in this situation. When Isaiah stepped into the cockpit, both pilots were focused on their instruments, backs turned to the door. The professional atmosphere of the flight deck, the gentle hum of avionics, the occasional radio communication, the vast panorama of clouds and blue sky beyond the windscreen, filled Isaiah with vicarious pride. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," he said. Malcolm and Jasper turned simultaneously, professional smiles freezing in identical expressions of shock as they recognized their father. "Dad?" Malcolm managed, recovering first. "Mr. Washington," Jasper corrected quickly, maintaining professional protocol while acknowledging the relationship with a subtle nod. From her position at the cockpit door, Rachel's eyes widened. "Washington," she repeated, glancing between the pilots and their visitor as comprehension began to dawn. Isaiah smiled warmly at his sons. "First Officer Washington. Second Officer Washington. The aircraft seems to be performing admirably." "Yes, sir," Malcolm replied, falling into the formal pattern they'd established for professional settings. "Would you like an overview of our flight systems?" For the next few minutes, Isaiah engaged in knowledgeable conversation about the aircraft, revealing an expertise that surprised Rachel, who lingered at the threshold. He asked detailed questions about the avionics upgrades Washington Airways had recently implemented, discussed the fuel efficiency metrics of their route planning, and even noted the specific modifications to this particular airframe. Throughout this exchange, Rachel's expression transformed from confusion to dismay as she pieced together the evident connection between the Johnson passenger and the Washington pilots. The physical resemblance, now that they were side by side, was unmistakable. The identical strong jawlines. The same thoughtful, deliberate speech patterns. The shared passion for aviation details. "I appreciate the overview," Isaiah concluded, checking his watch. "I won't keep you from your duties any longer." As Isaiah turned to leave, he extended his hand to each son in turn, the gesture both paternal and professional. "Washington Airways is fortunate to have pilots of your caliber on the flight deck." Rachel stepped back automatically as Isaiah exited, her face now openly troubled. She escorted him back to his seat in awkward silence, hyper-aware of every pair of eyes that followed their progress through the cabin. As Isaiah settled back into 2C, he noticed Rachel lingering uncertainly beside him. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Johnson?" she asked, her voice notably subdued. "No thank you, Ms. Bennett. That will be all for now." Rachel retreated to the galley, where Alicia was preparing the meal service cart. The passenger in 2C, Rachel whispered urgently. "He's related to the pilots. I thought so, Alicia replied calmly. The family resemblance is pretty obvious. But his name is Johnson, not Washington, Rachel continued, growing agitated. And Captain Weber clearly knows him. Who is he exactly? Alicia shrugged, though her expression suggested she might know more than she was saying. Maybe you should have treated him with the same respect you show other passengers, regardless of who he might be. Rachel's face flushed. She busied herself with meal preparations, her movements betraying her growing anxiety. The realization that she had potentially mistreated someone with influence at the airline, someone connected to both the pilots she disparaged and senior management, was beginning to sink in. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain Weber had returned from his break, noticing the brothers' barely contained excitement. I take it you had a visitor, he asked with a knowing smile. Our father, Jasper confirmed. We had no idea he'd be on this flight. Weber nodded. Isaiah Johnson. One of the most knowledgeable aviation experts I've met. Been flying with him occasionally for years. He paused, studying their reaction. Though I admit, I never made the connection until recently. He prefers to keep it quiet, Malcolm explained. Wanted us to earn our wings without any special treatment. Noble intention, Weber acknowledged. Though from what I've seen today, special treatment is the last thing either of you needs. Your performance has been exemplary. As the aircraft began its initial descent toward the Rocky Mountains, light turbulence buffeted the plane, a common occurrence on this route. Malcolm adjusted the altitude slightly to find smoother air, demonstrating the instinctive feel for the aircraft that marked exceptional pilots. Back in the cabin, the sudden turbulence provided Rachel with a legitimate reason to check on first-class passengers. She approached Isaiah's seat with manufactured concern. Just a bit of mountain turbulence, sir, she explained with forced brightness. Nothing to be concerned about. Isaiah looked up from his newspaper. Yes, I'm familiar with the air currents over the Continental Divide. Your pilots seem to be handling it expertly. Rachel nodded uncomfortably. Our pilots are very qualified. Indeed they are, Isaiah agreed, his gaze steady. Both graduated top of their class at the Air Force Academy. Combat veterans with thousands of flight hours. Multiple commendations. The pointed emphasis on their qualifications wasn't lost on Rachel. She swallowed hard, realizing that Isaiah had almost certainly overheard her earlier disparaging comments about diversity hires and lowered standards. As she turned to leave, Isaiah spoke again. Ms. Bennett? Yes, sir. I believe we'll be experiencing more significant turbulence soon. You might want to prepare the cabin accordingly. The statement, delivered with calm authority, heightened Rachel's growing suspicion about Isaiah's position within the company. Only someone with extensive aviation knowledge or access to real-time flight data would make such a specific prediction about upcoming conditions. Yes, sir. Thank you for the suggestion. As Rachel moved away, the realization was dawning that she had potentially made the worst professional mistake of her 15-year career. What she couldn't yet know was just how far-reaching the consequences would be, or that the true identity of Isaiah Johnson would soon send shockwaves through the entire aircraft. True to Isaiah's prediction, the Boeing 737 encountered a patch of moderate turbulence as it crossed the Rocky Mountains. In the flight deck, Malcolm and Jasper responded with the calm precision of experienced pilots, adjusting their altitude and course to navigate through the rough air with minimal passenger discomfort. Washington 1382, Denver Center, the radio crackled. We're showing moderate to severe turbulence reported at flight level 360 along your route. Recommend descent to flight level 340 for smoother conditions. Denver Center, Washington 1382, Malcolm responded. Descending to flight level 340, thank you for the advisory. The brothers exchanged knowing glances as Malcolm initiated the descent. Their father's warning about turbulence had predated even air traffic control's advisory, a testament to Isaiah's intimate knowledge of aviation and weather patterns. He always could read the sky, Jasper commented quietly. Malcolm nodded. Even before meteorologists could. Captain Weber observed this interaction with interest. Your father has quite a reputation in aviation circles, he noted. Though I've always known him as Johnson, not Washington. Our mother's maiden name, Malcolm explained. We use it professionally to avoid any perception of nepotism. Nepotism? Weber's eyebrows rose. Is he in management at Washington Airways? The twins exchanged another look, a silent communication passing between them. Before they could respond, the cockpit door chimed with a request for entry. Weber checked the security camera and buzzed Rachel in. Captain, she began, her voice artificially bright, several passengers have expressed concern about the turbulence. I thought you might want to make an announcement. Standard Mountain Air, Weber replied. First Officer Washington has already adjusted our altitude for smoother conditions. It should improve momentarily. Rachel's gaze flicked nervously between the twins, her earlier condescension replaced by obvious discomfort. Of course. Thank you, Captain. She hesitated. Mr. Johnson in first class mentioned the turbulence before it even began. He seems quite knowledgeable about our operations. Weber nodded. Mr. Johnson has extensive aviation experience. May I ask, what his role is with the company? Rachel ventured, unable to contain her growing anxiety. That's not really relevant to our flight operations, Ms. Bennett, Weber replied neutrally. Was there anything else? Dismissed, Rachel retreated from the cockpit, her professional composure visibly shaken. As the door closed behind her, Weber turned back to the Washington brothers with a questioning look. I take it Ms. Bennett has been made aware of some connection between you and Mr. Johnson. It appears so, Malcolm confirmed. Though she doesn't seem to understand the full picture yet. In the cabin, the turbulence had indeed subsided as the aircraft descended to the recommended altitude. Rachel moved through the first-class section, checking on passengers with mechanical efficiency until she reached Isaiah's seat. More water, Mr. Johnson, she offered, her previous disdain replaced by an almost desperate attentiveness. Isaiah looked up from his tablet. Thank you, Ms. Bennett. That would be appreciated. As Rachel poured the water, her hand trembled slightly. You seem to have predicted that turbulence perfectly, she commented, attempting casual conversation. I've flown this route many times, Isaiah replied. The air currents over the Rockies are fairly consistent this time of year. Rachel nodded, searching for a way to repair whatever damage she might have done. You mentioned earlier that you had safety concerns about our pilots. I want to assure you that Washington Airways takes all such concerns very seriously. Isaiah studied her for a moment. Actually, Ms. Bennett, I believe I asked about your concerns regarding our pilots. The ones you described as diversity hires who wouldn't normally make the cut. The color drained from Rachel's face. Several nearby passengers glanced their way, having overheard this exchange. I may have misspoken, Rachel stammered. What I meant was. I believe your meaning was quite clear, Isaiah interrupted calmly. As was your differential treatment of me compared to other first-class passengers since boarding. Not to mention your disrespect toward First Officer and Second Officer Washington. Rachel glanced around nervously, aware of the audience their conversation had attracted. Perhaps we could discuss this privately, sir. I'm quite comfortable having this discussion here, Isaiah replied. Transparency is important when addressing discrimination, wouldn't you agree? From several rows back, Alicia watched the interaction with growing interest. She had been documenting Rachel's behavior throughout the flight, troubled by the pattern of microaggressions she'd observed. Now, seeing the senior flight attendant's obvious distress, Alicia moved forward under the pretense of assisting with beverage service. Everything all right here? She asked, positioning herself beside Rachel. Fine, thank you, Rachel replied tersely. Isaiah smiled at Alicia. Ms. Turner, isn't it? I noticed your professional and equitable service throughout the flight. It's appreciated. Rachel's eyes narrowed at this exchange. You know Alicia's name? Have you flown with her before? I make a point of noticing exemplary staff, Isaiah responded. Just as I notice problematic behavior. The implication hung in the air between them. Rachel's professional mask was slipping, revealing the panic beneath. She excused herself abruptly and retreated to the galley, where she immediately pulled out her phone, searching frantically for Isaiah Johnson, Washington Airways. The search results made her blood run cold. Meanwhile, the aircraft continued its westward journey, now flying over the rugged terrain of eastern Nevada. In the cockpit, preparations for the approach into San Francisco International Airport were underway, with Jasper taking the controls for landing as previously planned. Washington 1382, Salt Lake Center. Descend and maintain flight level 280. Expect vectors for the DYAMD arrival into San Francisco, the controller instructed. Salt Lake Center, Washington 1382, descending to flight level 280 for the DYAMD arrival, Jasper confirmed, beginning the descent. Captain Weber used this transition period to step out of the cockpit again, ostensibly to use the lavatory but with another purpose in mind. He made his way to Isaiah's seat. Mr. Johnson, he said quietly, I assume this visit is unofficial. The board wasn't informed of an inspection flight. Isaiah smiled. Completely spontaneous, Harold. Just wanted to see my boys' first flight together. Weber nodded understanding. They're extraordinary pilots. You must be proud. Beyond words, Isaiah admitted. Though it seems not everyone on this crew appreciates their qualifications. Weber's expression grew serious. Ms. Bennett's behavior hasn't gone unnoticed. I'll address it in my flight report. No need, Isaiah replied. I believe this situation may resolve itself naturally. As they spoke, Rachel emerged from the galley, stopping short when she saw Captain Weber conversing with Isaiah. Her face had lost all color, her normal confidence replaced by visible dread. The search results had revealed what she now realized was common knowledge among senior staff. Isaiah Johnson was not just connected to Washington Airways, he owned it. The regional carrier had been on the verge of bankruptcy 3 years earlier when an anonymous investor had purchased it, injecting capital and transforming it into a growing mid-tier airline with an expanding route network and modernized fleet. That investor had been Isaiah Johnson, who had deliberately maintained a low public profile while revolutionizing the company's operations and culture. As Rachel stood frozen in the aisle, Alicia approached Captain Weber. We're preparing for initial descent, Captain. Is there anything specific you'd like announced regarding the approach into San Francisco? Just the standard briefing, Ms. Turner, Weber replied. Though perhaps you should handle the announcements for the remainder of the flight. This public transfer of authority from the senior flight attendant to a junior crew member did not go unnoticed by Rachel or the nearby passengers. It represented a clear vote of no confidence in Rachel's leadership, a professional humiliation that would normally trigger a formal incident report. As Weber returned to the cockpit, Rachel finally approached Isaiah's seat again, her demeanor completely transformed. Mr. Johnson, she began in a hushed, urgent tone, I believe there may have been some misunderstandings during our flight. If I've given any impression of unprofessionalism, I sincerely apologize. Isaiah regarded her steadily. Ms. Bennett, this isn't about impressions. It's about explicit bias in your treatment of passengers and crew members based on their race. Behavior that violates not only company policy but federal anti-discrimination laws governing air carriers. Rachel's professional facade crumbled entirely. Please, sir. I've been with this airline for 15 years. My record has been exemplary. Has it? Isaiah asked mildly. Or has it simply gone unchallenged? I wonder how many other passengers and colleagues have experienced treatment similar to what I observed today. Before Rachel could respond, the aircraft's PA system activated. Ladies and gentlemen, this is First Officer Washington speaking, Malcolm's voice announced. We've begun our initial descent into the San Francisco Bay Area. We anticipate some light chop as we descend through cloud layers, but we should be on the ground in approximately 35 minutes. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for arrival. The standard announcement carried extra weight for Rachel now that she understood who was actually in the cockpit, and their relationship to the man she had been mistreating for the past 3 hours. "If you'll excuse me," she murmured, "I need to prepare for landing." As Rachel moved away, Alicia took her place. "Mr. Johnson, is there anything you need before we begin our descent?" "Just one thing, Ms. Turner," Isaiah replied. "Would you happen to have a business card? I believe we may need to continue our conversation after we land." The implications of this request were clear to anyone within earshot. As the aircraft began its descent toward San Francisco, the tension in the cabin had nothing to do with altitude changes or air pressure. A reckoning was approaching, one that would transform not just Rachel Bennett's career trajectory but potentially the culture of Washington Airways itself. In the cockpit, Jasper skillfully guided the 737 through wispy layers of coastal fog, the San Francisco skyline emerging through breaks in the clouds. Neither brother was aware of the confrontation building in the cabin behind them, focused entirely on executing a perfect arrival for their historic first flight together. What they couldn't know was that their father, the quiet force behind both their careers and the airline itself, was about to use this flight as a watershed moment for addressing the subtle discrimination that had plagued aviation since its earliest days. The California coastline emerged through wisps of fog as Washington Airways Flight 1382 began its final approach into San Francisco International Airport. Jasper Washington handled the controls with the practiced confidence that had earned him top marks throughout his military and civilian training. Washington 1382, San Francisco approach. You're cleared for the ILS approach to runway 28R. Wind 270 at 8 knots. Cleared for ILS approach runway 28R, Washington 1382, Jasper confirmed, adjusting their heading precisely. In the cabin, passengers gathered belongings and prepared for landing. The smooth descent reflected the skill in the flight deck, a fact not lost on the now subdued Rachel Bennett, who moved mechanically through her landing preparation duties, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. "Flaps 15, Malcolm called out as they continued their approach. "Flaps 15, Jasper confirmed, extending the wing flaps to increase lift at their reduced speed. The choreography between the brothers continued with practiced precision, altitude callouts, configuration changes, and system checks flowing in perfect sequence. Captain Weber observed without intervention, his presence merely supervisory at this point. 1,000 feet, Malcolm announced as the radio altimeter counted down. "Stabilized," Jasper responded, the aircraft perfectly aligned with the runway. Outside the flight deck, most passengers remained oblivious to the drama that had unfolded among the crew, their attention focused on the approaching ground or their electronic devices. In first class, Isaiah Johnson sat watching the approach through his window, pride evident in his expression as the aircraft descended smoothly despite gusty crosswinds that might challenge less skilled pilots. 500 feet. Still stabilized. The runway threshold appeared ahead, approach lights flashing in sequence. In these final moments of flight, the Washington brothers demonstrated the exceptional skill that had carried them through barriers and biases throughout their careers. 100 feet. The 737's wheels kissed the runway with barely perceptible contact, the kind of landing pilots pride themselves on and passengers appreciate without fully understanding its technical difficulty. As the thrust reversers deployed with a controlled roar, spontaneous applause broke out in the cabin. "Nice landing," Weber commented with genuine appreciation. Jasper's smile was brief but satisfied. "Thank you, Captain." The aircraft taxied toward its assigned gate, the San Francisco terminal gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. Standard arrival announcements played through the cabin speakers, though passengers noted that the voice belonged to Alicia rather than the senior flight attendant who had conducted most previous announcements. As the aircraft docked at the jet bridge and the engine spooled down, an unusual tension permeated the cabin. Rachel stood near the forward galley, her normally confident posture replaced by visible anxiety. Alicia supervised the cabin preparation for deplaning with calm efficiency, occasionally glancing toward Isaiah's seat in first class. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to San Francisco International Airport," Captain Weber's voice announced over the PA system. Local time is 2:45 p.m. with partly cloudy skies and a temperature of 68 degrees. On behalf of Washington Airways and our entire crew, we thank you for flying with us today. Please remain seated with seatbelts fastened until we've parked at the gate and turned off the fasten seatbelt sign. The standard announcement continued, but Weber added a non-standard conclusion: "We've been privileged to have some special passengers aboard today's flight, including the Washington brothers' father. We hope you've enjoyed your journey as much as we've enjoyed serving you." This unusual personal touch caused Rachel's face to pale further. The acknowledgement of Isaiah's presence and relationship to the pilot served as public confirmation of connections she had only recently discovered, and had unwittingly disrespected throughout the flight. As passengers began to deplane, Isaiah remained seated, his attention now on his tablet. Most first-class passengers filed past with routine thank yous to the crew, unaware of the significance of the distinguished man who sat patiently in 2C. Rachel stood at her position near the door, mechanically thanking departing passengers while casting nervous glances toward Isaiah. The flight deck door opened, and Malcolm and Jasper emerged, their professionalism evident in every aspect of their appearance and demeanor. They nodded to Rachel without expression before spotting their father still seated in first class. "Dad," Malcolm greeted him warmly, professional distance giving way to familial affection now that the flight had concluded. "Didn't expect to see you today. Thought I'd surprise you," Isaiah replied, standing to embrace both sons briefly. "Excellent landing, Jasper. Couldn't have done better myself." "You never were much of a pilot, Dad," Jasper joked, the family's comfortable banter revealing a close relationship. Captain Weber joined them, his presence completing the impromptu gathering of the flight's key personnel, all except Alicia, who continued assisting the last economy passengers with their deplaning. Rachel stood frozen near the aircraft door, the full import of the situation becoming increasingly clear. The Washington brothers were not simply pilots who happened to share their father's last name, they were the sons of the airline's owner, a fact she had been oblivious to while treating them with thinly veiled contempt. As the last passenger departed, Rachel found herself alone in the cabin with the Washington family, Captain Weber, and Alicia, who had returned from the rear of the aircraft. The artificial smile she had maintained throughout deplaning faltered completely. Isaiah turned to face her directly. "Ms. Bennett, I believe we have some matters to discuss." "Mr. Johnson, she began, but Isaiah raised a hand to pause her response. "The name is Washington," he stated calmly. "Isaiah Washington. My sons use their mother's maiden name professionally to avoid exactly the kind of preferential treatment, or discriminatory treatment, that might come from association with the airline's ownership." The revelation hung in the air. Though Rachel had begun to piece together Isaiah's connection to the airline, the explicit confirmation of his ownership status struck her with visible force. I had no idea," she stammered. "Clearly," Isaiah replied. "Though I wonder if it would have made a difference in your behavior. Would you treat black passengers and crew members with respect if you knew they were in positions of authority? Or is respect only reserved for those you perceive as deserving based on their race?" The directness of the question left Rachel speechless. Captain Weber and Alicia watched silently, while Malcolm and Jasper maintained the professional composure that had served them throughout their careers in predominantly white spaces. "I assure you, sir, I treat all passengers with the same level of service," Rachel finally managed. "That is demonstrably false," Isaiah replied evenly. "I've documented at least 17 instances during this 3-hour flight where you provided noticeably different service to me compared to white passengers in the same cabin class. From requesting excessive identification during boarding to repeatedly neglecting standard service elements. Each instance minor in isolation, but forming a clear pattern of discriminatory treatment." He turned to Alicia. "Ms. Turner, in your time working with Ms. Bennett, have you observed similar patterns of behavior?" Alicia hesitated, professional loyalty at war with her commitment to fairness. "Yes, sir," she finally acknowledged. I've noticed inconsistent service standards applied to passengers of color, particularly in premium cabins. I've documented several instances in my own reports. Rachel's expression shifted from anxiety to betrayal. Alicia, you've never mentioned any concerns about my service. I've tried, Alicia replied quietly. You dismissed them as oversensitivity. Captain Weber cleared his throat. If I may, Mr. Washington. I've also observed concerning interactions between Ms. Bennett and the first and second officers prior to departure. Her behavior demonstrated clear skepticism about their qualifications that seemed unrelated to their extensive experience. Isaiah nodded, turning back to Rachel. Ms. Bennett, Washington Airways has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. This isn't about a single bad day or isolated mistakes. From what I've observed personally and what others have corroborated, this represents a pattern of behavior incompatible with our company values. Rachel's professional facade crumbled completely. Please, she pleaded, I have bills, a mortgage. I can't lose my position over a misunderstanding. This isn't a misunderstanding, Isaiah replied firmly. It's discrimination. The kind my sons have faced throughout their careers despite exceptional qualifications. The kind that forced me to build my own company because doors kept closing when executives saw the color of my skin. He paused, his expression resolute but not vindictive. You're placed on administrative leave effective immediately, pending a full investigation by our Human Resources Department. You'll have the opportunity to present your perspective, but based on multiple witnesses and my direct observation, I don't anticipate your return to active flight status. The finality of this statement seemed to penetrate Rachel's denial. Tears welled in her eyes, not of remorse, Malcolm noted, but of self-pity. 15 years, she whispered. 15 years of perfect evaluations. Perfect evaluations from whom? Isaiah asked pointedly. In an industry where less than 5% of pilots and 8% of senior management are people of color. Perhaps those evaluations measured criteria that overlooked the experiences of passengers and colleagues who didn't match the dominant demographic. The truth of this observation hung in the air, uncomfortable but undeniable. The aviation industry's history of exclusion and bias was well documented, from the pioneering black pilots who had to fight for the right to fly in the military to the ongoing underrepresentation of people of color in commercial cockpits. Ms. Turner will handle the return flight to Atlanta, Captain Weber stated. We'll arrange for a replacement senior attendant to join the crew there. Rachel nodded numbly, the full consequences of her actions finally registering. With a last desperate attempt at salvaging her position, she turned to the Washington brothers. I never meant to. If I'd known who you were. That's precisely the problem, Malcolm replied quietly. Respect shouldn't depend on knowing someone's status or connections. It should be the baseline for how professionals interact with everyone. Jasper nodded agreement. We've encountered your attitude throughout our careers, Ms. Bennett. The assumption that we couldn't possibly be qualified. That we must have received special treatment rather than work twice as hard to overcome barriers. Today, those assumptions finally caught up with you. As Rachel gathered her personal items under Alicia's supervision, Isaiah turned to his sons with evident pride. That was some landing, Jasper. And perfect handling through that mountain turbulence, Malcolm. You've both become the pilots I always dreamed of being. In this moment of family pride, contrasted against Rachel's professional downfall, the arc of progress and accountability was unmistakable. What had begun as a routine flight had transformed into a powerful statement about the ongoing struggle against discrimination in professional spaces, and the importance of creating consequences for those who perpetuated it, regardless of how subtle or normalized their behavior might be. The private airline lounge at San Francisco International Airport provided a discreet setting for the impromptu meeting that followed Flight 1382's arrival. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bustling tarmac, where countless aircraft in various liveries taxied, loaded, and departed, a constant dance of aviation commerce continuing regardless of the human dramas unfolding within their cabins. Rachel Bennett sat rigidly on a modern leather couch, her normally immaculate appearance now showing signs of strain. Across from her, Isaiah Washington occupied an armchair with the natural confidence of someone accustomed to authority. Malcolm and Jasper stood nearby, their pilot uniforms still crisp despite the long flight, their expressions professionally neutral. They were not alone. Melissa Chen, Washington Airways West Coast HR Director, had arrived within 20 minutes of being contacted, tablet in hand, her expression serious as she reviewed the preliminary incident report. "Ms. Bennett," Melissa began, her tone businesslike but not unkind, "I understand you've been informed of the administrative leave pending investigation. I need to clarify what this entails." Rachel nodded stiffly, her eyes red-rimmed but her voice steady. "I'm familiar with company policy. Nevertheless," Melissa continued, "I'm required to review the process. You'll receive full pay for the first 2 weeks while we conduct interviews with today's crew members and review documentation. You'll surrender your company ID and secure access credentials today but retain your health benefits throughout the process." The clinical description of corporate procedure seemed to steady Rachel somewhat. Process and rules were familiar territory, even when they were being applied to her rather than by her. "May I ask what specific policies I'm alleged to have violated?" she asked, a hint of her professional demeanor returning. Melissa glanced at her tablet. "The formal investigation will determine specifics, but preliminary reports indicate potential violations of our anti-discrimination policy, customer service standards, crew resource management protocols, and possibly our workplace harassment guidelines." The comprehensive list seemed to deflate Rachel's momentary composure. "I've never received a single complaint in 15 years, she protested weakly. "That may speak more to reporting systems than to behavior," Isaiah observed. "Many passengers of color simply endure differential treatment rather than reporting it, knowing such reports are often dismissed as oversensitivity or misunderstanding." Captain Weber, who had joined the meeting after completing his post-flight responsibilities, nodded agreement. "I've witnessed similar patterns throughout my career. Subtle enough to evade formal documentation, but clear enough to create hostile environments for both passengers and crew members of color." Rachel's expression hardened. "This feels like a witch hunt. One flight with the owner's family, and suddenly my entire career is invalidated?" "No one is invalidating your technical competence, Ms. Bennett," Isaiah replied evenly. "Your procedural knowledge and safety record aren't in question. It's your application of company values regarding equal treatment and respect that's under review." He leaned forward slightly. "And to be clear, today wasn't a planned evaluation. I booked this flight last minute when I realized it would be Malcolm and Jasper's first time flying together. I had no intention of conducting any kind of assessment of crew performance." "Then why are you doing this?" Rachel asked, gesturing to the formal proceedings underway. "Because what I witnessed can't be ignored," Isaiah stated firmly. "Not if I want Washington Airways to truly reflect the values it claims to uphold." A knock at the lounge door interrupted the tense exchange. Alicia Turner entered, still in her flight attendant uniform, carrying a thin folder. "Ms. Chen, you asked for my documentation," she said, addressing the HR director. Melissa nodded. "Yes, thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." Alicia sat beside Captain Weber, visibly uncomfortable at being included in this high-level confrontation but determined to fulfill her professional responsibility. "Ms. Turner, I understand you've documented concerning behavior from Ms. Bennett on previous flights?" Melissa prompted. "Yes," Alicia confirmed, opening her folder. "I've noted 19 incidents over the past 8 months where I observed disparate treatment of passengers based on perceived race or ethnicity. I've also documented 7 instances of dismissive or undermining comments toward crew members of color, including today's interactions with First Officer and Second Officer Washington." Rachel's face flushed with indignation. "You've been spying on me." "I've been documenting workplace concerns according to company protocol," Alicia corrected calmly. "Section 4.3 of our employee handbook explicitly encourages documenting potential violations of our anti-discrimination policy." Isaiah studied the younger flight attendant with appreciation. "How long have you been with Washington Airways, Ms. Turner?" 3 years next month, sir." "And what prompted you to begin this documentation?" Alicia hesitated, glancing briefly at Rachel before answering. "My first month on the job, I observed a pattern that troubled me. When I attempted to address it directly with Ms. Bennett, she dismissed my concerns and suggested I was playing the race card to cover for my own performance issues." The room fell silent at this revelation. Rachel stared at her hands, no longer attempting to defend herself. Isaiah turned to his sons. "And your experiences today?" Malcolm, ever the more diplomatic of the twins, chose his words carefully. "We've developed strategies for handling these situations throughout our careers. Today's interactions were unfortunately familiar. Textbook microaggressions," Jasper added more bluntly. "Questioning our qualifications, assigning tasks outside our responsibilities, implying we were diversity hires rather than earning our positions. Nothing we haven't seen before, just more concentrated." Captain Weber nodded grimly. "I observed several concerning interactions myself. As the supervising captain, I should have intervened more directly, and for that, I apologize." Isaiah absorbed this information thoughtfully. After a moment of reflection, he addressed Rachel directly. "Ms. Bennett, I purchased this struggling regional carrier 3 years ago with a specific vision in mind. Not just to build a profitable airline, but to transform an industry that has historically excluded people who look like my sons and me from its ranks. An industry where less than 2% of airline pilots are black, despite decades of qualified candidates emerging from military and civilian training programs." He gestured toward Malcolm and Jasper. "My sons use their mother's maiden name professionally because I wanted them to earn their accomplishments without any connection to ownership. They've faced every barrier this industry erects, and still excelled because of their exceptional talent and determination." Rachel remained silent, her earlier defiance replaced by uncomfortable recognition. "Washington Airways will be different," Isaiah continued. "We'll create an environment where excellence is recognized regardless of race, gender, or background. Where passengers receive consistent service regardless of their appearance. Where subtle discrimination is neither tolerated nor dismissed." He turned to Melissa. "Ms. Chen, please ensure the investigation is thorough, fair, and transparent. Ms. Bennett deserves due process, but our passengers and crew members deserve an environment free from bias." "Understood, Mr. Washington," Melissa replied, making notes on her tablet. Rachel finally spoke, her voice subdued. "I never thought of myself as prejudiced. I've always prided myself on professionalism." "Many don't recognize their own biases," Isaiah acknowledged. "But impact matters more than intent. The passengers who received inferior service because of their race experienced real harm, regardless of whether you consciously intended it." He stood, signaling the meeting's conclusion. "I suggest using this administrative leave for reflection, Ms. Bennett. Consider whether there's a place for you at the company we're building, and what changes would be necessary for you to be part of it." As Rachel was escorted out by Melissa to complete the necessary paperwork for her leave, Isaiah turned to Alicia. "Your courage in documenting these incidents despite potential professional risk is exactly the kind of integrity we need. I'd like you to consider a new position we're creating, Chief of Cabin Crew Training, with a focus on inclusive service standards." Alicia's eyes widened. "Sir, that's a significant promotion." "Based on demonstrated leadership qualities," Isaiah replied. "The documentation you maintained wasn't just complaint gathering, it showed commitment to our core values even when it was professionally risky. That's the definition of leadership." After Alicia departed to prepare for the return flight, the Washington men found themselves alone in the lounge. The formal barriers between owner, pilots, and father and sons dissolved. "I'm sorry you had to experience that," Isaiah said, embracing each son briefly. "Today should have been purely celebratory." "Actually," Jasper replied with a hint of his characteristic boldness, "I think it was perfect. Our first flight together demonstrated exactly why we became pilots in the first place. To change this industry from the inside. Malcolm nodded agreement. We knew what we were signing up for, Dad. Today wasn't about one flight attendant's behavior. It was about establishing that excellence doesn't have to come with enduring discrimination as its price. Isaiah regarded his sons proudly. You two have become better men than I dared hope. He paused, growing more serious. I should have told you I bought the airline. Keeping that from you wasn't just about avoiding nepotism, it was also my own fear that you'd think I didn't believe in your abilities. We understood, Malcolm assured him. And honestly, it made today's revelation that much more satisfying. The three men laughed, tension finally breaking. Outside the lounge windows, a Washington Airways jet accelerated down the runway, lifting gracefully into the California sky, a fitting metaphor for the airline's trajectory under the Washington family's guidance. What had begun as a routine flight had transformed into a watershed moment for the company. The confrontation with Rachel Bennett wasn't merely about one employee's behavior, it represented a clear statement about the culture Isaiah Washington intended to build. A culture where excellence wasn't determined by race or background, where accountability applied at all levels, and where the subtle discrimination that had plagued aviation since its earliest days would finally face consequences. As they prepared to depart the lounge, Isaiah placed a hand on each son's shoulder. Your mother would have been proud today. Not just of your flying, but of how you handled yourselves in the face of the same prejudice she fought throughout her career. The mention of their mother, a pioneering black attorney who had passed away 5 years earlier, brought emotional depth to their professional triumph. Her maiden name, which they carried professionally, now represented not just their independence from their father's influence but a tribute to her own battles against discrimination in the legal profession. The Washington men walked together through the terminal, 3 generations of determination, excellence, and vision united in purpose. The airline bearing their name was more than a business, it was a platform for transformation in an industry long overdue for change. 1 week later, Elijah Johnson stood backstage at the Richardson Hall Auditorium in New York City, taking deep, measured breaths as he prepared to perform in the final round of the Young Classical Musicians Scholarship Competition. His fingers felt nimble and warm after his careful preparation, and the familiar pre-performance butterflies in his stomach now felt more like excitement than anxiety. Through a gap in the curtains, he could see the audience filing in. His heart leapt when he spotted Captain Michael Freeman and Flight Attendant Jasmine Washington in the third row, both dressed elegantly for the occasion. Captain Freeman had exchanged his pilot's uniform for a charcoal suit, while Jasmine wore a vibrant blue dress. Beside them sat Dr. Rodriguez, who had rearranged her professional schedule to attend after forming such a strong bond with Elijah during their shared ordeal. In the front row, Keisha Johnson sat straight-backed and proud, her eyes occasionally darting to the backstage area where she knew her son was waiting. She had used her emergency savings to extend their stay in New York, refusing to miss this moment after everything they had been through. 5 minutes, Elijah, the stage manager informed him quietly. Elijah nodded, his mind flashing back to the events that had led to this moment. The past week had been a whirlwind of unexpected developments. The videos of Patricia Whitfield's racist behavior and Captain Freeman's dignified response had gone viral, amassing millions of views across social media platforms. The subsequent emergency landing had only amplified the attention, transforming what might have been a fleeting internet moment into a national conversation about dignity in the face of discrimination and courage under pressure. Patricia Whitfield had faced swift consequences for her behavior. Her employer, a prominent real estate firm with a diverse client base, had terminated her position after the videos emerged. Her attempts to control the narrative through social media had backfired spectacularly when former colleagues and employees came forward with similar stories of entitlement and racial insensitivity. More surprisingly, Madison Whitfield had reached out to Elijah through social media with a heartfelt apology. "I'm sorry for how my mom treated you," she had written. "What she did was wrong, and I should have said something sooner." The beginnings of an unlikely friendship had formed through their subsequent exchanges, with Madison sharing her own struggles with her mother's behavior and Elijah offering understanding rather than judgment. "Elijah Johnson to the stage, please," the stage manager called, pulling him back to the present moment. With one final deep breath, Elijah straightened his new navy blue blazer, a gift from Captain Freeman, and walked onto the stage. The polished grand piano waited for him, its lid raised to project the sound throughout the auditorium. He took his position on the bench, adjusting it slightly before looking out at the audience. The faces before him blurred slightly in the stage lights, but he could still make out his mother's encouraging smile, Captain Freeman's dignified nod, and Jasmine's subtle thumbs up. Drawing on the inner strength he had discovered during the flight crisis, Elijah placed his hands on the keys and began to play. The opening notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the auditorium, delicate and precise. As he played, Elijah found himself entering a state of flow where technique and emotion merged seamlessly. The piece that had played in his mind during those terrifying moments on the plane now poured from his fingertips with newfound depth and maturity. What had once been a technical challenge had become a personal statement, a testament to resilience and grace under pressure. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of profound silence before the audience erupted in applause. Elijah stood and bowed, his eyes meeting his mother's tear-filled gaze. Later that evening, as the competition judges deliberated, Captain Freeman approached Elijah and Keisha in the reception area. "That was extraordinary, Elijah," he said, his deep voice warm with genuine admiration. "You played with the kind of emotional insight that can't be taught." "Thank you, sir," Elijah replied, still flushed with the excitement of his performance. "Actually, I have some news to share with both of you," Freeman continued. "The airline has been closely following your story, and the CEO was deeply moved by everything that happened. They've decided to implement new anti-discrimination training for all staff, using our experience as a case study." "Really?" Keisha asked, surprised. "Yes. And there's more. They've asked me to help develop the program, which means I'll be reducing my flight schedule to focus on this initiative." Before they could discuss further, the announcement came that the judges had reached their decisions. Everyone returned to the auditorium for the award ceremony. Elijah sat with his hands clasped tightly in his lap as the judges announced the third-place winner, then the second. When they called his name for first place, the scholarship prize his mother had barely dared to hope for, Keisha's joyful sob could be heard throughout the hall. As he accepted the award, a crystal trophy and a full scholarship to the prestigious Northeastern Conservatory of Music's youth program, Elijah spoke briefly but powerfully. "Music taught me to breathe through difficult moments," he said, his young voice steady and clear. "When faced with discrimination, it gave me dignity. When faced with danger, it gave me focus. This scholarship means everything to me and my mom, and I promise to make the most of this opportunity." The reception following the ceremony buzzed with conversation and congratulations. As Elijah and Keisha navigated the crowd, they were approached by a distinguished older man whom Captain Freeman immediately recognized. "Mr. Johnson, Mrs. Johnson," Freeman said formally, "may I introduce Mr. Robert Harrington, CEO of Atlantic Airlines." "It's an honor to meet you both," Harrington said, shaking their hands warmly. "Your story has had a profound impact on our company culture." "Thank you for everything your airline has done for us," Keisha replied graciously. "Actually, I'm here to discuss something new," Harrington explained. "We're launching a scholarship program for underprivileged youth interested in aviation careers, pilots, engineers, air traffic controllers. With your permission, we'd like to name it the Freeman Johnson Initiative for Excellence." Captain Freeman looked as surprised as Elijah and Keisha. "Sir, I'm honored, but it was your leadership that day that exemplified our highest values," Harrington interrupted. "And Elijah's courage inspired us all." As they discussed the details of the program, Jasmine joined them, along with Dr. Rodriguez. "There's something else you should know, Elijah," Jasmine said with a bright smile. "Remember how I mentioned my brother is a jazz pianist? He's offered to give you complimentary lessons whenever you're in Atlanta. He says anyone who can keep their cool during an emergency landing deserves some improvisational skills to match. Later that night, as Elijah and Keisha returned to their hotel room, exhausted but elated, Elijah stopped to look out the window at the New York skyline glittering against the night sky. "Mom," he said quietly, "I've been thinking. What if I used some of the competition prize money to start a music program for kids at the community center back home? Kids who can't afford lessons like I couldn't before Mrs. Chen volunteered to teach me." Keisha wrapped her arms around her son's shoulders, amazed at the young man he was becoming. "I think that's a beautiful idea. Your father would be so proud of who you are." 1 year later, Elijah Johnson boarded another flight to New York, this time for his advanced placement audition at the Northeastern Conservatory. As he settled into his seat, 14A, window, specifically requested, a familiar voice came over the intercom. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Freeman speaking. Welcome aboard Flight 2463 to New York LaGuardia. We're expecting clear skies and smooth sailing today." Elijah smiled, remembering how far they had all come since that turbulent day. As he gazed out the window at the Atlanta skyline, he placed his fingers on his knees, mentally practicing his audition pieces. The plane began to taxi, but this time, there was no anxiety, no fear, only anticipation for the journey ahead and gratitude for the unexpected connections that had changed the course of his life. As the aircraft lifted off the runway, Elijah thought about the community music program he had founded with his prize money, now serving 35 children who would otherwise have no access to musical education. He thought about Madison Whitfield, who had found the courage to stand up to her mother's behavior and was now an unlikely ally in promoting tolerance among her peers. He thought about Captain Freeman, whose dignified stand against discrimination had sparked meaningful change within the airline industry. Most of all, he thought about how a moment of ugliness had ultimately revealed so much beauty in the world, through the courage of those willing to stand up for what's right, the kindness of strangers in a crisis, and the healing power of music that had been his salvation in more ways than one. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and the journey continued. What would you have done if you were in Elijah's position? Would you have stood your ground against discrimination or given up your seat to avoid conflict? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more inspiring tales of courage and resilience. Have you ever witnessed someone standing up against injustice? How did it change your perspective? Thank you for joining me for this journey, and remember, sometimes our greatest strength is revealed in our most challenging moments. This story teaches us that standing up against discrimination requires both courage and dignity. Elijah showed us how maintaining composure in the face of prejudice isn't weakness, it's strength. Captain Freeman demonstrated that true leadership means protecting the vulnerable, even when it's uncomfortable or unpopular. We learned that allies matter, from Jasmine's supportive presence to Dr. Rodriguez's compassion, and even the silent passengers who later found their voices. Their actions remind us that confronting racism isn't solely the responsibility of those experiencing it. The crisis revealed how adversity can transform us. Elijah discovered inner strength by connecting to his passion, showing that our deepest talents often sustain us through our darkest moments. Most powerfully, the story illuminates how standing against injustice creates ripples beyond the immediate moment, changing policies, inspiring others, and building unexpected bridges. Madison's growth shows that even those raised with prejudice can learn and change when exposed to its harmful impact. In our divided world, this reminds us that courage, dignity, and compassion aren't just personal virtues, they're catalysts for meaningful change. What moment in your life have you witnessed discrimination but remained silent? Or perhaps you found the courage to speak up. Your experiences matter in this ongoing conversation about racial justice. Share your story in the comments below, your words might give someone else the courage they need. If Elijah's resilience inspired you, hit that like button. If Captain Freeman's leadership moved you, subscribe to hear more stories of everyday heroes standing against injustice. Share this video with someone who needs reminder that one voice can make a difference. Thank you for joining me on this journey through a difficult but important story. Remember, Change begins with individual choices made in everyday moments. Together, we can create a world where dignity isn't just hoped for, it's expected.